I don't think most people even have a clue how powerful these tools are going to be from a conservation perspective. So it's not just about research, animal conservation, monitoring, all these types of things. And
you're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 284. Can drones democratize research and data collection of our oceans? For that question, we turn to Dr. Iain Kerr, CEO of Ocean Alliance, a nonprofit organization with a mission to protect whales and their ocean environment through research, scientific collaboration, public education, and the arts. For nearly 40 years, Ocean Alliance has made a positive difference in this world. Their staff works to carry out its mission with scientific integrity to help protect and preserve the marine environment on which the lives of all of us, people as well as whales, are utterly dependent. Iain began his career at Ocean Alliance as a volunteer and has grown with the organization over the last 30 years. He is listed as an author on over 35 scientific papers and has ensured that Ocean Alliance messages reach the general public through international television and films. Iain has led international conservation research across the globe. As a result of exposing illegal sea cucumber fishing in the Galapagos, Iain received the SOS Grand Blue Award in 1994. He was awarded the Chevron Conservation Award in 2006, and in 2014 the Annenberg Foundation listed Iain as one of 25 visionary leaders. In 2013, Iain recognized that drones could be the future of whale research and conservation. During an attempt to collect samples from a whale, he was sprayed by the whale's blowhole. This chance encounter set him on a quest to develop a way that a drone could collect whale samples expended through their blowholes. This ultimately led to the creation of the Snot bot and opened a door to a new type of whale research, one that democratizes data, enabling groups throughout the world to conduct research and collect data on marine mammals that they would not be able to do using expensive research vessels. This led to the creation of the Snot bot and opened the door to a new type of whale research, one that democratizes data, enabling groups throughout the world to conduct research and collect data on marine mammals that they otherwise would not be able to do without using expensive research vessels. In this edition of the Drone Radio Show, Iain talks about Ocean Alliance, the evolution of the Snot bot, and how drones can spur more research of our oceans, which ultimately impacts the entire ecosystem of our world. Iain will also be speaking at this year's AUVSI Exponential 2020, scheduled to take place entirely as a virtual event over October 5th through the 8th. From energy to transportation and construction to defense, join 8,500 plus users, technologists, and policymakers to collaborate on ideas, share lessons learned, and build new partnerships. For more information and to register for the event, go to exponential.org. And before we hear from Iain, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have an idea for a great show and you want to share your experience, please contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's learn how drones are democratizing research of our oceans with Iain Kerr of Ocean Alliance. Let's pick up the interview where I ask Iain to introduce himself.
My name is Iain Kerr, and I'm the CEO of a nonprofit called Ocean Alliance. And we actually focus on marine mammal research and are perhaps best known for our discovery that whales sing songs, and songs that are even on the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft heading now into deep space.
Now, Ocean Alliance has been around a long time, right?
That's correct. It was founded by this fellow called Roger Payne, who's still our president, in 1971. We have the longest ongoing study of any great whale, which is the southern right whale. And as I said, Roger and his wife, Katie Payne, discovered that whales sing songs in the 70s and created the album The Songs of the Humpback Whale, which I think it went multi-platinum, I think, in the best-selling sort of wildlife album to date. And there actually is sort of even a core of our conversation today is how can we engage people with the wild world? Do you know what I mean? We're so disconnected. And I think it was actually fascinating in the 70s when people heard that whales were singing songs. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people felt that it was a catalyst not only for the Save the Whale movement, but for the larger environmental movement.
Yeah, I was just about to ask if Ocean Alliance was responsible for facilitating the whole Save the Whales movement.
Absolutely, 100%. And what's interesting, Roger is, I'm not sure if you're aware of a MacArthur Fellow. He's been knighted in the Netherlands. So a very prestigious scientist who just happened to be a musician and was sometimes was criticized for leaving science and almost going into the media. And he said, wait a minute, I'm not leaving science, I'm taking science into the media. And I think Roger has again and again proved to sort of be a leader, because even nowadays we need scientists who are better communicators, because, when we talk about the environment, a lot of people, I guess, don't seem to realize it's in our own benefit to have a healthy environment. At the end of the day, one of the biggest losers will be us, will be humanity.
Can you give us some context as to what was happening at the time, and especially why Roger felt the need to create the organization?
Absolutely. And I think Roger will forgive me if I tell part of his story, but he was a bioacoustician, and I think he just wanted to do more with his life than be a scientist. He's like, can I do something that can sort of affect some change, beyond the publications of scientific papers? And the story he's told me is one day, I think it was out on Cape Cod, he saw a dead whale on a beach and someone had stuck a cigar in his blowhole and carved their initials in the side of this animal. And he said, God, humanity's relationship with the wild world needs to be better with this. And clearly he's been, incredibly successful. And certainly at that time, I think people were very receptive of the sort of, I don't know if I call it the holistic approach to the wild world. If you don't mind, our logo or our slogan, if you don't mind, is actually healthy whales, healthy oceans, healthy humans. Do you know what I mean? Certainly I'm a whale lover, as is Roger and many of our staff, but we have enough information to understand now that it is really the interconnectedness of species that is important. It's important, for whale survival, but also for human survival.
There's an old Startrack movie where the crew had to go back in time and grab a whale so that they could stop an incoming rogue satellite. Did the movement have anything to do with that movie?
Absolutely. I was around then too, believe it or not. Absolutely. It's fascinating, actually, never more than nowadays, the hard job is to get the listening. Now we have better communication tools, but there's just so much noise out there. But in many ways, it was the same back then. We didn't have so many tools, from the radio to the TV and the hundreds of channels. But how do you get the listening? And it's actually fascinating because Roger was at Cornell University at the time and became friends with Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan was like, hey, I'm doing I'm putting these recordings on this gold record, and could we put sort of whale recordings on it? So I think it's fascinating. This record probably speaks volumes more about humanity now than we ever expected, because the record is sort of all about humans and all about our achievements. And then, right at the end, there's like the largest animal that's ever existed, that sings songs. And then with that, I don't know who it was that came to Roger with this, but Roger actually became good friends with Leonard Nimoy. And actually, they did a whale album together called Deep Voices. And Leonard Nimoy actually narrates a part of Moby Dick, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, those were our whale recordings in that movie. Hopefully that wasn't prescient, the idea of Well, certainly neither Roger nor I nor many other people want to live in a world without whales, but alas, I think humanity will go the way of the whales. And I'm sorry if I'm being a tad negative there.
Let's jump to today. Can you give us an idea of the state of the whales and the state of our oceans?
Well, absolutely. And you know what? I'll tell you just a little bit about myself, if you don't mind. You know, I'm a Scotsman, I'm a biologist, and whether good or bad, I'm sort of an internal optimist. So I've never done better than when somebody said, well, you can't do that. I'm like, you can't do that? Why can't we do that? Do you know what I mean? And as running a small nonprofit, you know, I can't compete with the big nonprofits. And I'm sure we'll see a lot of that at AUVSI. You know, these smaller groups that can't spend $100,000 developing a new blade or something like that. So to be a small, successful group, and I think Steve Jobs talked about this, you have to innovate, you have to create, and you have to take risks. And the reality is now, as I'm sorry to steal other people's lines, but they say we know more about the surface of the moon than we do our oceans. And I'm like, well, that sounds fantastic. What an opportunity. Do you know what I mean? The bad news is, alas, when I started working with whales, there was one major threat, okay? And that threat was commercial whaling, okay? And it was sort of simple. There's the problem. We've got to deal with it. Alas, now whales are actually in a worse situation than they've ever been. Populations are rebounding, but the reality is whales there's still people commercial whaling. You've still got ship strikes. You've got entanglement in lines. You've got entanglement in nets. You've got pollution. And then you've got this whole issue of acoustic bleaching, which is almost like a non-destructive sound, but a pervasive sound that can actually severely impact an animal. You know, when we tend to think of threats, you tend to think of these sort of like I don't know. With commercial whaling, it was people on a boat with a harpoon. It was a very clear threat. Now we've got these sort of chronic threats that are almost wearing whales down. And dare I say, many of these threats are wearing humanity down. But again, I see that as an opportunity. And the one thing I'm looking forward to talking to you about that I think this world of drones and this world of sensors now represents is the sort of the price point of entry. You know, oceanography, because of the cost, has long been a prerogative of the privileged. You know, you needed a $30 million boat to sort of go out there and do this extended research. And, you know, people weren't trying to keep people out of the club. It was just expensive. And I've been all around the world. I ran an expedition around the world from 2000 to 2005 and visited like 21 countries. And the people you met, sort of the intellectual capital, the enthusiasm, and these people are saying, just give me a tool. And now we have these drones and these sensors, and I feel like I'm a lottery winner. And even, I will say, the first time I flew a drone over a whale, I felt like I might have been that person who first looked down a microscope and saw a cell. You know, you understand cells exist, but you could actually see the cell. And think about this for a second, Randy. I've spent my life studying logs that are like floating on the water. Logs that occasionally would throw a bucket of water at me and then disappear under the surface and reappear 5 miles away. It's like, whoa, you know, I mean, you know, if you could think of a bad way to study whales, it would probably be chasing them around in boats.
When did you start using drones in oceanography?
Well, okay, I will say, again, it's almost amusing, but building, flying, and dare I say crashing a lot and breaking a lot and not building properly was my hobby to sort of get me away from biology. Do you know what I mean? This is definitely one of these careers where it's like a lifestyle rather than a job. So I desperately needed to sort of get away, and I've always enjoyed the drones. Of course, now they are part of the job. But in short, I was working in the Gulf of Mexico after the Deepwater Horizon disaster, okay? And probably aware, an awful lot of energy and attention was being given to, you know, the shorelines and the beaches and all this type of stuff, which is quite right. But actually, the spill happened something like 65 miles offshore in what is a breeding habitat for sperm whales. So we were trying to collect biological samples from sperm whales so we could try to understand and do some sort of health assessment to say, what type of effects are they having on these animals, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want to make light of it, but I felt like I was playing the world's most expensive version of whack-a-mole, because a whale would appear over here and we'd sort of race over there and then it would dive. And then would it appear over there and then we'd race over there and it would dive. And when I say race, 7 or 8 knots. And a key thing to remember here, whales live in a world of sound, okay, and we live in a world of sight. That's why, charismatic animals like a panda or an otter or a bear, are sort of very appealing to us. We live in a world of sight. Whales live in a world of sound, and we certainly found, an outboard motor with a high pitch racing up to an animal is both disturbing to the animal, and we often found they would dive. So I was sitting on our boat, potentially ripping up $100 bills here, not getting the samples I needed. And that was bad for the whales, and that was bad for Ocean Alliance, and being that I flew sort of airplanes, I was like, I wish I could just fly something over there. And then, of course, and I would suggest you try to go on a whale watch one day, I was sitting on the bow of the boat, frustrated because the day had ended and we hadn't managed to meet, our goal of samples that we need for our data set. And the whale dove it was just out of range from me shooting a little biopsy arrow. And I got engulfed in this, dare I say, disgusting cloud of whale snot. And it was sticky and it was truly offensive smell. But you got to remember, from a biologist's perspective, smelly means productive. So I was like, forgive the joke here, but I thought, I smell an idea here. I wonder what's in whale snot. And then I went online, and there was a lady called Araceva Whitehouse who had tried using a radio-controlled helicopter with a gas engine. But of course, a gas engine is a single, thrust point down, and a sperm whale or a whale is a single thrust point up, which is the blow. And then, of course, you've got the chemicals from the gas engine. But I also noticed in captivity, somebody had done some exhaled breath condensate collection. So I'm like, okay, and I'm sure many in the drone world will be like, I got an idea. I've got an idea here. And then I hit the brick wall of, when I spoke to funders about, I want to collect whale snot with a drone. And we're now talking, 2013. I sort of had the idea in 2011. 2013, I don't think there was a DJI in 2013. So we built some of our own drones. I actually worked with a local college here called Olin College of Engineering, and these kids thought it was great. And we 3D printed like an air gun, which is going to be our surrogate whale. And the students at Olin College called it Snot Shot, And then we had a little inflatable raft that we put all these sensors on and pressure plates, and we tried flying our drone over that, and we called the yacht a Snot Yacht. But I just couldn't raise the money. And as much as we could do it cheaply, I just couldn't raise the money. And I'm sure many people out there have felt the pain. And this is where, I'm extraordinarily lucky that I crossed paths with Sir Patrick Stewart many years ago. And no one was more surprised than me when I called him up and said, hey, Patrick, can I sort of harass you in the name of science? And he was like, absolutely, Ian, come on over. And I'll tell you a funny story in that quickly, and I don't even know if Patrick knows this, but I had my little team of 4 people here, and we were going to go film him, and I thought he was in New York, because I thought he was doing a play in New York. He's like, yeah, come on down on Monday, and this is like Wednesday, and I'm like, okay, we'll see you Monday. And I said, what's your address again? And he was like, 9691 La Brea Avenue, Hollywood, and I'm like, oh my God, he's in California. So my crew loved it. We all flew out to California and harassed the hell out of Sir Patrick. He was a true gentleman. And I think there is a little video on our website, whale.org, where you can see us harassing Sir Patrick. And we actually raised $200,000 on a Kickstarter there.
Was that the first time you collected whale snot? I mean, were you collecting it at all before that?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, I mean, I've spent, 25 years biopsying animals, but always had this frustration. But, on one level, how can I say this? You almost become intellectually comfortable. And I will tell you, even when I went to try to get some new permits or something, I've heard people say, well, this is how we've done it for 30 years. It works fine. And you know what I mean? And I'm like, this is how we do it. But it was probably because we had a crisis with the Deepwater Horizon disaster. I desperately wanted this data so we could sort of put together this environmental health jigsaw puzzle. And I wasn't meeting my goals, and I was spending a lot of money. And, I guess it was sort of desperation. Before
the Snot bot, how were you collecting samples from the whales?
So we had a special crossbow, with a biopsy arrow that's actually developed in Finland that they send over to us. And you shoot this into the side of the whale and you get like a pencil eraser piece of tissue and blubber. And from that, you can do the DNA, and then you can look at all these things like hormones and everything else. What's interesting, though, that sample is more of a legacy sample. What's another thing that's so interesting about the exhalation is that is sort of the body chemistry at that time. And I think, if I'm preempting a question here, what's so exciting sort of in this whole world that you and I are talking about, we're getting better and better sensors at the same time as we're getting better and better drones, and they're lighter and they're smaller and they're more accurate. So, in many ways, I was just at the right place at the right time.
What do drones offer over the old way of using darts to collect samples?
These drones have radically changed our world because it's not just about the snot. I mean, when I shot that biopsy, which, by the way, imagine if your doctor said to you, I'm just going to take, your temperature, but we've got to stick a needle in every time. Do you know what I mean? There's this whole idea of this non-invasive sample, which I say is sort of priceless. So the fact that we could just collect this non-invasive sample, but suddenly you're up in the air looking down at the whale as against, as I say, looking at this floating log. And wait a minute, you can see how the animal moves. You can see if the animal is fat. You can see if it's skinny. The drone is videoing everything. They're high definition images. You know what I mean? You know how high you are. You know the wind speed. You've got the air data. And wait a minute, what's the population study? Who's the animal related to? Who's it hanging out with? It's like, we have literally gone from data deficit to data overload, which is amazing. And there are lots of programs out there that are helping us manage the drone data. But I still believe we're in that sort of first 10%. I'm sure many of the AUVSI people are with me here, but I don't think most people even have a clue how powerful these tools are going to be from a conservation perspective. So it's not just about research, animal conservation, monitoring, all these types of things. And if you don't mind going back to that earlier comment about we know more about the surface of the moon than we do our oceans, our oceans cover 71% of the planet. Hey, and actually, again, a quick information here. So countries own 200 miles within their 200 miles offshore is their territorial waters. If you remove all of Earth's land masses and their territorial waters, you're left with over 50% of the planet. So over 50% of the planet belongs to nobody, or as I like to say, belongs to everybody. These are international waters, And there are some people that take advantage of that, but what an opportunity. And humanity's got to go there, whether it be for drugs, for chemicals, for exotics, for adventure, for aquaculture, and what's going to take us there are these drones, and I'm sure many of which will see the precursors of the next generation at AUVSI.
What are the cost savings of using drones?
Well, we got to be a little careful here, but a 2 to 3 month expedition in the Gulf of Mexico on our own research vessel that we owned, and we didn't include depreciation and all that type of stuff, would be at least $250,000. And by the way, of your crew of, let's say, 9 people, probably 3 were volunteers. And by the way, when I was there, our cook had a PhD in environmental toxicology because that was the only way she could get on the boat. So these were like top of the line people. So, you could probably say technically, I mean, again, some of these, Scripps and Woods Hole boats, they're $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 a day. All right. So we would go out at, I would say, potentially our costs then, all told, could have been around $5,000 a day. Okay. And I would probably be lucky if I could get 5 samples. And I'll be lucky. And by the way, I almost should have done the math for you, but there are many days when you didn't get any samples. You know what I mean? But we have been out with a drone in the Dominican Republic. And for example, guess what? And it's sort of fun. It's like 4 people jump in a boat. The first expedition I did down in Argentina, there were 4 of us and a drone and a 12-foot inflatable. And we were literally sitting next to each other. Do you know what I mean? There was like no room, We're all just sitting next to each other and hand launching. But we made it work. And how much did that probably cost us? Probably cost us, $100 a day for the boat and everything else. And then I think in one day we got something like 28 samples. But it goes back to the other thing. And first of all, we have 6 Petri dishes on the drone. That's how we collect the snot. So when I say 1 sample, that's 6 Petri dishes. It's like it's not 1 drop of snot. You know what I mean? And then 2, remember, I've got the photo ID, I've got the photogrammetry, I've got the behavior, I've got the environmental conditions. All of this other stuff is an additional cost, that we weren't getting on the boat. Does that make sense?
Have you developed a certain technique when approaching a whale with the drone and collecting the snot?
Exactly, we do. And actually, I will say we currently share our protocols with, I think, about 15 different groups around the world. We are about, hopefully, to publish just a paper on a lot of those protocols, because you know what happens when you're sort of doing this every day for a while and evolving and you do all this stuff and you sort of take it for granted and you realize you've made 1,000 mistakes there that, well, you think it's easy. Well, I've been doing it for 3 years. Do you know what I mean? So to your point, we have written down all of those protocols. And there is actually a lot more going on than one might think. And it is a little bit harder to be in exactly the right place at the right time when the whale blows. I mean, it's sort of funny. The lower you are, the more condensed the blow is. But the blow is sort of like an upside down pyramid. You know what I mean? So the lower you are, the more condensed it is. So you want to be low. But then the target window is very small. And I've had many a time when I've been sort of right behind the whale and there's been a little bit of a crosswind and this giant blow goes up into the air and my whole crew are like, wow. And I didn't get anything because I was literally 1 foot to the left, So, yeah, there's a lot more going on, but we have learned a lot. We have documented that, and we are sort of sharing that with people that are interested.
Is there a telltale sign that the whale gives when it's about to blow?
Well, it's actually interesting and a great question, by the way. As I've mentioned previously, getting up in the air and looking down is it's like this sort of lottery win. And certainly when you have clearer waters, we've known with certain species and actually certain individuals, they actually have, these fins to the sort of left and right. You call that pectoral fins. And we've often noticed, the animal will it'll come up and blow, it will go down, and they sort of do a shallow dive in between the blows. And if you can see them, then right before they come up again, they'll sometimes almost shift up these pectoral fins, potentially like an elevon on an airplane, and brings them to the surface. So yeah, there are these sort of tells that different animals have. And even that is fascinating. We didn't know they did that before because you would have only seen that if you're flying in an airplane,
What have you learned from viewing the whales from above?
It's fascinating to understand just getting up in the air, that bigger view. So we'll get up in the air and we'll look down and we'll see a group of animals and seeing the complexity and how these different animals interact. And actually, there may even be some reciprocal altruism going on between animals that are related, that know each other. We see sort of mother-calf pairs doing stuff. Personally, and this is probably not incredibly scientifically valuable, and I could provide you a link to this video clip, looking at some of these intimate moments between mothers and calves, for me, has just been amazing. Because typically, if you come up in a boat or if you're in the area, almost like any mother and calf, some intimate behavior might stop because you're like, I don't quite know what's going on here, but whatever. But seeing those intimate behaviors, I've loved being able to sort of step back and get the bigger picture. We use this program Air Data. Do you know what I mean? We've been able to create heat maps after we've been out in the field for a while. And these are types of things we've never known. I mean, you would laugh. I can imagine this on a boat. You're driving around and you say, God, we did 60 miles today. And then you look at the heat map and it turns out, guess what? You didn't move out of more than a 1 square mile box. And that's something we might not have noticed previously because we didn't really have time to do that. But I think being able to do a non-invasive health assessment is priceless, okay? Being able to do this sort of morphometrics, try to understand the body condition of animals has been amazing. One of our corporate partners is FLIR, and being able to use some of their cameras to sort of understand maybe a bit more about sort of the thermal characteristics of whales is just amazing. And I think that's another huge field that's just going to open up.
How can conservation organizations benefit from using drones?
I think what's exciting right out of the gate, and I've mentioned this, but in the past, if you needed this really good tool that would do like 19 different things, it cost $10,000. I mean, we had sediment corers in the Gulf of Mexico that literally we dropped down 3,000 feet to get a sediment sample, and I think we lost 2 of them. Do you know what I mean? So the drones, I mean, you can get a really sophisticated drone now for like $1,500, okay? So first of all is the entry point. The price point is so important. Secondly, it's the fact that they're easy to use. They're field friendly, they're user friendly, they're scalable, they're replicable. Do you know what I mean? There are so many contradictions here. It's so much against the grain. Certainly collecting snot, is quite hard, and I'm not referencing your pilot skills, but almost anybody could launch a small drone today and fly out over a whale with a permit and look down and study that animal. That's just incredible. And who knows, count respiration rates or, whatever they're interested in. So the fact that they really are relatively easy to use and like everything's being videoed on board and so on and so on. And I think it's only going to get better. I mean, as I sort of mentioned, I think the first drone that we built with Olin, and it wasn't their fault, but I think it flew off into a tree once for a reason nobody knows, and now you've got it will return home when the battery's flat and this type of stuff. And I think as we get to have software and more AI and more interpretive things, I mean, for example, who knows, maybe there's someone out there that's actually going to develop some software for me so that I'm not always juggling to be at the right place at the right time. Because, if I'm a few hundred feet away from the whale and I'm quite close to the blowhole, it's quite hard for me to actually work out what the wind angle is. You know what I mean? But actually the drone knows what the wind angle is because the drone's countering that to sort of be in position. So I just think that, for me, and I will admit to being a science fiction fan, I just can't imagine. I struggle to hold the potential here of these sort of drones. Maybe there's a drone in the air and a drone on the surface and a drone under the water and they're all talking, and then this one comes down and downloads, and we're truly understanding the world about us. I mean, from a conservation perspective, generally speaking, if people know something is bad, they'll tend to stop it. And we are incredibly ignorant with our oceans. I mean, forgive me, but America's first environmentalist, Henry David Thoreau, said, "We do not associate the idea of antiquity with the oceans as we do the land, for they are unchangeable always." So while on one hand he was very right about that, we don't associate the idea of antiquity, they are not unchangeable always.
Earlier you said that we know more about the surface of the moon than we do of the oceans. Could drones play a role in trying to reverse that trend?
Well, massively. And I would say, I don't believe it's just about conservation and just about studying. I'm a little frustrated because for me at least, when I go to a lot of these conferences and drone conferences, it's just about sort of oil or agriculture or mapping or farming or, electricity lines or whatever it is. And I'm like, you know what? Humanity is going to have to turn to the oceans more and more to feed ourselves, to survive for these new drugs or whatever. And I mean, I hate to say, what did they say? What was it in The Graduate? Didn't Dustin Hoffman, the guy said to Dustin Hoffman, the future sun is plastics? The future sun, the future, Randy, is drones. It really is. And I think for all of the reasons we've talked about, for price point, for durability, for adaptability, for creative repurposing, you know what I mean? And I'm surprised from a business perspective that more people don't see this market. I mean, I think I mentioned to you once before, but in the wildlife conservation field, right now, I think it's something like 78 billion, I think, is invested every year in wildlife conservation. You know what? That's quite a big industry. And I think just the 10 largest nonprofits in the US spend 2.5 billion or more annually on wildlife conservation.
That's a lot.
Well, it is a bit of money. And you know what? We are seeing it. And I think, and again, even we're talking about oceans, but even over the land, do you know what I mean? I will admit, I just saw at a recent conference, a gentleman in China who developed a drone that could smell, a gas sensing drone. And there's this one town that was plagued by this problem. And I guess they'd spent years trying to find the problem. But the person, whenever they felt people was onto this company, they would just turn off whatever machine it was. And I guess this guy flew the drone over the city once and said, it's that building right there. Bingo. You know what I mean? And I think laws tend only to work when everybody sticks to them. And I think in so many areas, I think drones are going to change the world.
And that's where the term democratizing science, as you call it, comes in. What does that mean?
Well, I think it's back to this cost of entry point and skills to enter. Alas, this has just been an expensive business. I mean, I actually have a joke with a friend of mine. I would say, if you're studying a rhino and your Jeep gets a puncture, you don't sink below the Serengeti, nor when you're studying a rhino does it throw a bucket of water over you and it disappear beneath the Serengeti to appear 5 miles away. Drones at these affordable price points now and these sensors are just empowering incredible people all over the world. So I've run expeditions in Gabon, West Africa, and Argentina, Dominican Republic and Mexico. And in everywhere we've gone, we've actually left them with a drone and we've left them with protocols. And in Gabon, for example, it was just amazing. We left them with a small drone, and I guess they had an issue nearby of some illegal gold mining. And they knew the illegal gold mining was going on because sort of dirty, muddy water was flushing down into the main river. But hacking their way through this jungle to find these gold mines was incredibly expensive, and renting airplanes in these remote locations was incredibly expensive. And guess what? They used our drone and just flew it half a mile into the jungle. I think they found, a number of locations. And it's like, did I ever think that drones could be used for hunting down gold mines? Not at all. I think there are so many people out there with good ideas, people that want to change the world, and even kids. These kids at Olin College have helped me do all sorts of stuff. I mean, I tell people that I think we need to think outside of the box, and that's for old farts like me. These kids don't know what the box is. They just need the tools, and if you don't mind, I'll give my team a little pat on the back. Scientists have often been part of the problem. We called it Snotbot because we wanted to engage people and we wanted to excite people. And I think, once again, we have a tool here that the jewel in the crown is non-invasive data collection. But guess what? We've got kids at home saying, could I build a Snotbot? And what about a poop bot? And what about a whatever bot? You know what I mean? And I'm sure you can tell I'm excited, and I'm excited because I'm barely hanging on with my fingernails to this future that I'm dreaming of and I'm hoping to be a part of.
Yeah, sounds exciting. Is there something on the horizon that you're hoping to do or something that you're planning next with drones?
I will say, and it's understandable, we are challenged a little bit by permitting, okay? But we have recently bought, for us, a rather expensive fixed-wing aeroplane. It's the Aeromapper Talon, the amphibious one. And, you know, if you imagine when I go out in a boat that does 8 to 10 knots, you're like, okay, well, where the hell are the whales? Do you know what I mean? Well, imagine this. I can just launch my Aeromapper Talon and it will go out and sort of mow the road, mow the lawn, do you know what I mean? And okay, the animals are over here. And then there's a location, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull it off by next spring, but in San Ignacio Lagoon, there are the breeding and calving grounds for gray whales. And actually, there have been some quite large mortality events recently with these gray whales. And the way they currently count the whales in the lagoons, and they do a really good job, is they run this boat up the lagoons with 3 people, one looking forward, one looking right and left. But again, you've got these floating logs. You know, if an animal is a foot below the water, they won't see it. So can we have our fixed wing drone go out and find whales and count whales, you know, population abundance, and then we can bring the biological sampling drone in based on the information we've got from counting the animals with the fixed wing drone. And I think we'll be able to use that off Boston right now. They're trying to bring in big wind farms. But to do these wind farms, you know, they're going to need to be doing environmental mitigation. You know, what is going on with whales in the area? Well, I think we should be using drones to answer those questions, you know, rather than fixed wing platforms. The problem there, as I'm sure you're well aware, the biggest one right now is just some of this BLOS stuff, which is a little frustrating for me because, as I understand it, you know, the precepts for BLOS are basically designed over land. You know, so over land we have houses, roads, car parks, people, field, you know. Most of these mitigating factors don't exist offshore. But I think, to your point, I think, you know, clearly a hovering drone isn't the perfect platform, but when we start getting these platforms that can fly for over an hour, you know, the hovering drones for over an hour, I think that's going to be a big radical step forward. And remember, when I started in like 2012, we're lucky if we got 15 minutes. I think these fixed wing airplanes that can fly for like 2 hours, I think that's going to be crucially important, okay? Well, hopefully for 4 hours. And then the next big step is going to be integrating these two platforms, potentially with a waterborne platform that could even be like a little aircraft carrier. And then I think the next thing is bringing in AI that would allow us to have the hypothesis evolve at sea. You know, the current model is you have the idea in the lab, you take it into the field, and then a year later you're analyzing the data and you're like, oh shit, if only we'd known to collect that. Do you know what I mean? If we can have potentially AI seeing patterns in the field that maybe we're missing, then you can have your hypothesis sort of evolve at sea. And then the whole other conservation story is another one. Maybe that's another call.
Well, maybe there's someone listening to this podcast who has an innovative solution that they'd be willing to share with you.
I mean, that would be fantastic. And I would say, just to be clear, remember how I almost started this? We're a group that's happy to take some spaghetti and throw it at a wall. You know what I mean? So in many cases here, you know, we have 3 to 4 expeditions we run a year. They're often 2-week expeditions. You know, we go all over the world. But somebody says, hey, I've got some, you know, I'll make it up, quadrispectral whatever that can look. I'm like, hey, let's stick it on a drone. Let's give it a go. And if we can get some data, and this is sort of how I've run most of our programs, because we do have some other drones. We have Earbot, and of course we have FlearBot. But what I've gone and done is sort of beta tested it on the back of a previous expedition, and then you can go back and go to the funders and say, hey, look at the data we've got. This is what we want to do, and take it to the next level. So yeah, if anybody wants to work with us to do some beta testing or ground truthing, please, let's do it.
I want to go back to the first time you got hit with the whale snot. Now, I know myself, if that happened to me, my first inclination would be to go wash it off and get as clean as possible as fast as possible. What did you do?
You know what? I think I probably reveled in it. Because, I'm a 60-year-old guy here. It's very strange to have been in a business for 30 years and then have this sort of epiphany, do you know what I mean? That sort of radically changes everything. And I think I was sitting on the bow of our research vessel, the Odyssey. The sun was going down. I was incredibly pissed off. And then suddenly I'm like, am I actually having a good idea here? Is there something here? And I think, I'm not sure if I would call it a eureka moment. It was probably like a eureka hour. I probably just sat there on the bow and my crew were probably thinking, let's leave him alone because he's pissed off. Do you know what I mean? And I'm just thinking, well, could this do this? And could I fly a drone? Well, I can't do an airplane. And, because I will say, even in the beginning, I think the original idea was that you'd race through the blow, which isn't what we actually do. We actually literally hover over the whale and then it just blows the snot onto the thing. So, yeah, I probably reveled into it and then probably walked onto the bridge and said, one of my crew, smell this. And they probably was like, what? And I was like, smell this, because I've had an idea,
Did you have it tested then to determine its biovalue?
Another great question. I don't think we did. So I heard that people had done it in captivity. So people had collected stuff in captivity, but they don't care about DNA in captivity. You got the animal right there. They don't collect it. But I will tell you a truth, and I bet many an entrepreneur has been there. I was like Johnny Appleseed for whales and drones. Do you know what I mean? I went around telling everyone I met, snot bot and blah, 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 raise the money and do this and, we're going to do it. And then we flew down to Argentina for our first expedition and got in the boat. And I'm like, oh, shit, I hope this works. And it was a little bit scary because if you actually think about it, we've mentioned this, a whale is blowing up and a drone is blowing down. And, there is a little bit of a story on the different collection devices we tried and so on. And it wasn't sort of straight to Petri dishes and it wasn't straight to the first sort of drone we ever used. But I will tell you, there was a bit of panic at one point because I'd drunk my own Kool-Aid or whatever the expression was. And then suddenly I was in the field and I'm like, God, I hope it worked. I mean, it did work and it worked in spades, but there were doubts.
And my final question, Ian, what message would you like to leave regarding the use of drones in oceanography and in conservation?
I would say if you've got an idea and somebody says it's stupid, if you want, call me. Do you know what I mean? No, but if you've got an idea and you've got a passion, give it a go. Throw it against the wall and, don't spend 5 years trying to work out if it will work. It's back to these tools are so new for us and so trend breaking, the trend being go to university and study for 10 years or whatever. Do you know what I mean? We're breaking the mold with drones. And if you've got idea at whatever level, I encourage you to give it a go because after 30 years in an industry, I've sort of reached a level of success, from career-wise by going against the grain. Because at the beginning, nobody liked it, including, God bless him, Roger Payne, who hated the name. And that name has probably been one of the reasons why we've bridged these fields of data collection and animal conservation. Go for it.
That's it for episode 284 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Iain Kerr of Ocean Alliance. I want to thank Ian for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about Ocean Alliance, the Snotbot, or want to connect with Ian, check out the webpage at whale.org. And don't forget to check out Ian's presentation and many others at this year's Exponential 2020 on October 5th through 8th. It's a virtual event this year. Go to exponential.org to register. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you could help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.